long before we saw the transformative performance of Chris Evans as Steve Rogers, and before the divisive cameo from John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic in Doctor Strange 2, there was a team of heroes that followed the success of movies like X-Men and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. A team that was inspired from the pages of Marvel's first supergroup. A team, a family that has never met its true potential in live action. Hey there, true believers. As Marvel's getting closer to finally figuring out what to do with their oldest super team, we at JoBlo are continuing to revisit movies from before the MCU and dissect them like the cinematic lab rats that they are. Today, we're being treated to the campy and completely bonkers film that stormed theaters in 2005. Get it? Stormed theaters? Fantastic Four is a film that takes a family from being a group of dysfunctional scientists to being a well-oiled machine that comes together to defeat one of Marvel Comics' biggest threats. But was Fantastic Four really that fantastic?
Is that a trick question?
Find out in today's episode of Marvel Revisited. 2005's Fantastic Four was directed by Tim Story of Barbershop fame and follows the origins of Reed Richards, Sue and Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm as they discover the nature of their newfound superpowers after an accident in space leaves them stretchy, flaming, invisible, and whatever this is.
Don't do drugs.
But when the team discovers the nefarious motives of their friend and benefactor, Dr. Victor Von Doom, they must find a way to hone their abilities and use them to take down Doom and save each other from impending destruction. Now, of course, this was not the first time we'd see this family in live action. This is actually the team's second outing after the highly memed and ever sought after Fantastic Four film that Hollywood tried to destroy in 1994. But seeing as that film is considered unreleased, despite being available in its original unfinished form online, this 2005 installment serves as the technical first theatrical run. Based on the comic book series of the same name, Fantastic Four was originally created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1961. They are recognized as Marvel Comics' first supergroup and have remained a staple in the Marvel legacy ever since. Which begs the question, why hasn't Fantastic Four been as successful on the big screen as it has been on the page? Well, one thing is for sure, 20th Century Studios expected this movie to be a hit.
It's clobbering time!
It's catchy, right?
With a budget of $100 million, it's clear that this film was meant to carry the same level of fandom as Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, and given the movie's box office performance of $333 million, it seemed that this level of success was imminent. However, the movie's critical response tells a different story. More on that in just a bit, but for now, let's hit play on 2005's Fantastic Four. Oh, but you know what would also be fantastic? Liking this video and subscribing to JoBlo for the absolute best in movie content. Let's go. Fantastic Four wastes no time in getting to the superpowered shenanigans. The movie quickly establishes Reed Richards, played by Johan Griffith, and Ben Grimm, played by Michael Chiklis, as they're shopping their idea for a trip to space around town to anybody who can write them a check. The pair find themselves pitching their idea to Victor Von Doom, a previous classmate and collaborator of theirs, played by Julian McMahon, and Sue Storm, played by Jessica Alba, previously a girlfriend of Reed's. Once Victor agrees to fund their voyage for Reed's research, the team gets rounded out by the introduction of Johnny Storm, played by Chris Evans. He's Sue's little brother and a male model / spoiled playboy. Completely the opposite of Chris Evans' run as Captain America in the MCU, I'll tell you that much.
I can do this all day.
The casting for Reed, Ben, and Victor feels very true to the comics, and despite this movie catching a lot of well-deserved shade, I must admit that these three characters feel very much like the comic book characters that they're based on. In fact, it's been rumored and since confirmed that the original choices for the cast were vastly different than the lineup that we ended up getting. Originally, Alexis Denisov from Buffy the Vampire Slayer was set to play Reed and would be joined by the likes of Paul Walker as Johnny, John C. Reilly as Ben, and Charlize Theron and Jude Law as Sue and Victor respectively. While the original casting choice was certainly not lacking any star power, I'm actually pretty content with the casting that we ended up getting. Within the first 15 minutes of this movie, the team, now accompanied by Victor, is already on board a spaceship and heading into the eye of a meteor storm when a miscalculation from Reed leaves each of them vulnerable to the storm and imbued with superpowers. Interestingly, upon rewatching this movie, it's pretty clear that the powers given to the Fantastic Four and Doom are a reflection of their individual character traits. Hear me out. Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, is always stretching himself too thin in the name of his work and aiming for the highest possible outcome, so the storm gave him the ability to physically stretch his skin.
That's gross.
Sue Storm, or the Invisible Girl, feels unseen and unheard by Reed, thus being given the gift of physical invisibility as well as the ability to generate a force field to protect herself, which speaks to her guarded facade. Johnny Storm, or the Human Torch, is a hotshot with an affinity for going fast and taking it to the edge. So what can he do? Literally get hot and fly.
Oh, you're hot.
Why, thank you, so are you. And I'm not afraid to cry.
Now, Ben is the rock of the team, so he's turned into a mound of orange rock that is nearly unbreakable as the Thing.
It's clobbering time.
Then we have Victor Von Doom, or Dr. Doom, and he's vain and obsessed with his physical appearance as well as being endlessly hungry for power and control. So what does the storm do to him? He becomes physically mangled and disfigured while also having the ability to absorb actual power from electricity. This is a pretty cool little way to infuse each character's ability with the standout pieces of their personality. I dig it. After waking up from a storm-induced nap, the team begins noticing different symptoms presenting themselves, which kicks off the real adventure of this movie. Reed, Sue, Ben, and Johnny are now navigating life in Reed's home laboratory in the iconic Baxter building while they try to understand their powers and reverse them. See, one of the main conflicts of this movie is the tragic impact that the storm has on Ben. While the other members of the crew are left able to turn their powers on and off, Ben is stuck as a hideous orange rock monster and cannot revert back to his original form.
Hey! You think you got problems? You take a good look, pal.
This causes Ben's completely shallow fiancée Debbie to leave him, while everybody else in the city seems to be afraid of him. Now, while Reed and friends work on a so-called cure for their powers, Victor is feasting on that power and taking revenge on the businessmen who forced him out of his company after his public image was dragged through the mud following the accident in space, which was funded by his company. In a way, there's really two stories happening here. There's the story of the Fantastic Four trying to figure out their new dynamic and responsibilities as superheroes, and then there's Victor's story, which tracks a power-hungry man's eventual slip into madness. You could see where this movie's going from a mile away. While directing, Tim Story would often reference material from the Fantastic Four comic books, as it said that he was a huge fan. And this movie is littered with Easter eggs and small nods that only the truest of true believers would catch. Notably, a tweet from a fan years later pointed out a magazine seen in the film that draws attention to the casting of James Marsden and Rebecca Romijn as Cyclops and Mystique, something that fans would actually witness in the following year's X-Men: The Last Stand.
Grow up.
Come on. Am I the only guy who thinks this is cool?
Now, in terms of comic book accuracy, this movie does do a great job of capturing things like Reed's awkward approach to his relationship with Sue, as well as Johnny's lack of personal responsibility and larger-than-life persona. Although I must say, the movie also definitely fits into that idea that Marvel has always done way too much legwork to explain the most mundane details. For example, this movie gives Reed his iconic gray temples as part of his mutation. Why? You could just have him have gray hair on the side. I don't think anybody would care.
Nice too. Liking the grandpa look.
Once the team has figured out how to use their powers correctly, we see Johnny behave like a spoiled rich kid whose powers are only adding to his ego, while Reed and Sue use them sparingly and only when it's considered safe, and Ben is not so patiently waiting for Reed to build a machine which promises a cure. We get two different montages that show the team using their powers for various tests, as well as using them in their common everyday life. The montages are definitely fun, and it is charming to see our actors interacting with each other's powers in a light and comedic way.
Johnny!
But things do eventually get serious, however, once Victor learns how to channel his power and begins exacting his plan to kill the Fantastic Four. See, Victor believes that the storm turned them from ordinary people into gods, and he would rather kill his cohorts than sacrifice his quest for the ultimate power. This is classic Dr. Doom shit for sure, but in this movie it's a little bit undercooked for my taste. Ben breaks away from the team for a while and is treated like a monster by some and a hero by others. When Ben goes to a bar that he used to frequent, he's introduced to Alicia, an empathetic blind woman who doesn't have any fear of Ben's physical appearance. Look, blind or not, I'm happy somebody is finally giving our boy some love.
You know, being different isn't always a bad thing.
She takes an immediate interest in Ben too, and in fact this woman moves fast as she puts the moves on Ben pretty much right away despite him being a complete stranger to her. Victor is surveilling the team in order to make sure that Reed doesn't find a cure, and he begins trying to pick off the team one by one. There is some ridiculous dialogue in this section of the movie where Victor explains his entire plot out loud while watching the surveillance footage alone in his office. It took me directly out of the movie a couple of times, and it just doesn't make any sense for this dude to be breaking down his plot to destroy our heroes to an audience of none. Victor uses his natural powers of manipulation to convince Ben that Reed isn't interested in curing them, and then uses his actual powers to revert Ben back into his less powerful human form. This of course temporarily wins Ben over. Doom then attempts to neutralize and destroy the remaining 3 members of the team with things like heat-seeking missiles, flash freezing, and of course blunt force. When Ben realizes what Victor is trying to do, he turns himself back into the Thing and shows up to assist his family. I actually enjoyed this portion of the film just before the final conflict. It shows the acceptance and sacrifice that Ben is willing to make in order to save his friends. This reinforces the single most important theme for any piece of Fantastic Four media. They are a family. So the group works together to defeat Doom by using a blend of their superpowers and also their own mental prowess, as they're able to subdue Dr. Doom using simple science.
Man, I love this job.
Job, huh?
Seeing that this movie was released on the heels of Daredevil and X2, you'd be forgiven for expecting a darker and grittier story, but I personally liked seeing a superhero film that had a campier and more lighthearted tale, and it felt more like a comic book and less like a soap opera. Although comic book fans, movie fans, and critics alike were ultimately underwhelmed by this family-friendly big screen outing, as the movie was widely panned upon its release in the summer of '05.
Perfect.
The movie did leave itself open for a sequel, of course, by showing Dr. Doom in captivity being transported back to his hometown of Latveria while the Fantastic Four celebrates their success as New York's newest superpowered scientist. Ben finds some love in the form of Alicia, Sue and Reed get engaged, and Johnny, well, you know Johnny.
Oh, I need names and shots. Bartender!
Fantastic Four opened up on July 8th, 2005 and quickly earned the top spot at the box office with its opening weekend pull of $56.1 million in the first weekend. Despite making more than enough money to suggest that this film was a hit, audiences were not as impressed. The movie was widely negatively received and currently holds a Rotten Tomatoes score of 28%, if you're into that sort of thing, and the critical response was also very lackluster, with some calling it bland with subpar acting.
I think we have a serious problem.
Hollywood didn't seem to care, as they greenlit the sequel, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, and they were able to get the same cast attached to reprise their roles. Now that movie is an even bigger departure from the source material and an even less impressive installment in the strange and mostly forgotten saga, but I'm sure we'll talk all about that soon enough.
That's terrible news.
Personally, I can agree that the movie doesn't have the same level of finesse that we would expect from such a beloved IP with so much rich source material, but I also think that this movie is the closest thing we've gotten to a suitable Fantastic Four film in live action. Whether you're holding out for a John Krasinski-led MCU outing, or you're like me and you're just looking for anything to latch onto, it's safe to say that we've got some high expectations for Kevin Feige and the MCU to deliver us something special. And while we wait for that, we've got plenty of movies in the pre-MCU time capsule to dig up, rediscover, and fall in or out of love with. In the meantime, go ahead and tell us your thoughts in the comments down below, and also don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share with a friend who likes this sort of content. I'm gonna go dye my temples gray and try on a blue spandex supersuit, so we'll see you next time on Marvel Revisited.